Have you ever stumbled across a story online that hits you so hard it doesn't even feel like just some random post? Today I was scrolling through Reddit and found a few stories like that. Way too real, way too creepy to ignore. I've got a feeling you're going to want to hear these. So, no more waiting, let's dive right in.
Story 1.
I just stepped out of the hotel, my heart still pounding, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I had no idea how far I had driven, only that I couldn't stay there a second longer. Working the night shift at a quiet, mostly empty hotel was usually an easy job. Watch some movies, check the cameras occasionally, and wait for morning. Anyway, at about 2 a.m., 2 hours into my shift, I glance up from my show to check the cameras and notice that the light in the gym is on. The grainy footage shows a man, average looking, maybe on the older and fatter side, running on the one working treadmill. I don't recall checking him in, but I'm not the one who usually handles that stuff. Most people are in before my shift anyway. Whatever I thought, I can hardly judge him. Looks like he's doing more exercise than I ever do. I go back to my show, getting up once to grab another bag of chips from the concession area. When I get back, I check the time, 2:32 a.m. The one instance of actual work I do starts at 3 when I run the nightly audit on the computers, so I have to start keeping track of the time more closely around then. I spare a glance towards the cameras, and I'm surprised to see that the man is still running on the treadmill. Well, probably not still, right? Like he probably took a break to do other workouts, and now he's back to running. Or maybe he's been running this whole time. I don't know shit about exercise. In the crappy video quality, I could still see that he was sweating pretty hard. His shirt was almost an entire shade darker, and his thinning hair was visibly slicked back. At the time, all I thought was, good for him, I guess. Maybe this old fat guy should be motivating me to start working out for real. I finish another episode before getting up to start the audit process, which usually takes me a couple minutes. Before I left the office, I checked the cameras again, just because I didn't like being surprised by a guest waiting for me at the desk whenever I went up. My eye immediately caught onto the treadmill guy. Not just because he was still running, which was odd enough. I mean, it had been a full hour of, I'm pretty sure, non-stop running at a pretty quick pace for a guy like him. No, it's because this time he was staring straight at me. Well, not me, but the camera in the corner of the gym. I froze. We locked eyes, even though I obviously knew he couldn't see me. He was dead-eyed with a slack, exhausted expression on his face. And yet, he was still running, his arms no longer swinging along with his run, but instead hanging limply at his sides. I stood there for a long few seconds, confused and creeped out by what I was seeing. Right before I decided to write this guy off as a weirdo and turn away from the monitor to go do my job, he fucking smiled at me. At the camera, I mean. This creepy, wide smile that didn't really reach his eyes. And the worst part was that his tongue just sort of limply flopped out of his mouth, as if the only thing holding it in was his closed lips. It just bounced around like he had no control over it, moving to the rhythm of his jog. It was also way too long, like a normal tongue would just stay in a person's mouth if it was completely relaxed, right? Needless to say, I was really creeped out by this guy. I don't know how long he was staring at the camera in the corner, or why he decided to smile right as I noticed him doing it. Obviously, it was just weird timing, or he probably just decided to fuck with whoever might be watching the cams right at the moment that I looked up at him. But somewhere deep inside me, I felt like I was actually being watched. It was about to be 3 a.m., and if I didn't have the audit done by 3:15, I'd get another write-up and probably yelled at my boss about how it's literally the only thing I have to do all night. As anxious as this guy was making me feel, I didn't want to take my eyes off of him in case. I didn't even know why, honestly. However, I swallowed my nerves and tore my eyes away from the screen and fast walked my way to the front desk with my mind made up to do the audit as quickly as possible. Let me describe the layout real quick here. The back office is around the corner from the front desk. Down the hallway, past the elevators, the lobby where we do breakfast, the pool, and the laundry room is where the gym is. It's not the most well-designed hotel, and there's a few twists and turns leading to the gym at the other end of the first floor that makes directing guests verbally an annoying task. That also meant that as I stepped out to the front desk, I didn't have a straight shot to be able to see the gym. On the one hand, I was relieved that I was kind of far away from the weirdo, and on the other I was made even more anxious that he was now no longer in my sights. I booted up the ancient computer and started printing reports, filing them away in various folders with one hand and signing stuff that needed to be signed with the other. I'm sure I got some stuff wrong, but my priority was finishing this quickly so I could return to the office. I felt exposed out here. Couldn't see anything but the lobby, the sound of some pop radio playing way too loud, drowning out any other potential noise. Every second for the 10 minutes that I was out there, I felt like something really wrong was about to happen. I had to bring some of these reports back to the office to file them away while the audit process was running on the computers. Normally, I just did this at the end of the process to not make as many trips back and forth. And because as soon as the process ended, I had to update the system to roll over to the next day. If I didn't do that part within a minute of the process ending, the whole thing would get fucked up. This time, though, as soon as the computer started processing, I raced back to the office to check on the cameras again, if only just to confirm that he was still doing the same thing. The first thing I noticed when I got back was that the light in the gym had turned off. I hadn't heard the heavy gym door open and close from the front desk, but maybe the stereo was just too loud to hear it. I began scanning the rest of the displays, trying to find him on his way back to his room, in the stairwell, or the elevators, or wherever, just to give me some peace of mind. At first, I didn't see him anywhere on the cameras until my eyes glanced back at the gym display. It was subtle, but the dim light on the treadmill display that indicated that it was in use looked like it was still on. I thought that maybe he just forgot to turn it off when he left, and then I saw him. He was still in there, still running. I just hadn't seen him at first in the dark. His body was barely lit by the treadmill, but that's not why I noticed him. His eyes were two pinpricks of light reflecting off the display, still staring directly at me. I choked back a gasp when I saw that. Why had the lights shut off while he was still in there? They were motion sensors. Maybe if he was standing perfectly still, they'd turn off eventually, but there he was, still running at the same pace. He was clearly exhausted, his whole body drooping forward as his arms swung back and forth, but his legs continued moving at the same speed as they were an hour ago when I first noticed him, and his head was craned at an unnatural angle to keep staring at me. In the back of my mind, I considered that maybe this man needed help, some sort of mental illness thing that made him keep running, but my fear kept me rooted to the spot, not breaking eye contact. I still had the audit process to complete, but there was no way I was taking my eyes off of him again. What the fuck? I muttered under my breath, but as the last word left my mouth, he suddenly stopped running and fell off of the treadmill, landing headfirst on the tile floor. The cameras didn't record sound, but I could swear I heard a crack. In my shock, it took way too long to react to the lights coming back on and him standing with his neck clearly broken and his head limply hanging backwards off of it. As soon as he stood, he ran out of the room, passing the laundry camera, the pool, and making it halfway through the lobby before I broke out of my paralysis to run and slam the door to the office shut, locking it in the process. A slam against the door shook the office 2 seconds after I closed it, and then another and another, like he was using his body as a battering ram. I looked back at the cameras, but there were none pointing directly at the back office's entrance. The only thing I could see was the trail he left of blood and what looked like shit all the way from the gym to the lobby. The entire room shook with the force of this fucking thing slamming itself against the door, and every call I tried to make to the police failed again and again. The door was heavy, but I didn't have faith in it holding up for that long if he kept going at this rate. I just kept looking back and forth between the door and the cameras, selfishly hoping that a guest would notice the commotion and draw this thing's attention away from me. I don't know what would happen to them if they did, but at the moment I was only focused on getting the fuck out of the hotel. After a few minutes, 3, to be exact, the banging stopped. It took a second for me to notice, but once I did, my eyes shot to the monitor. He was definitely still there, since there were no bloody footprints leading away from the back office. I wish I could forget just how long I stood there, staring at the screen and willing it to show this thing walk away. But the display on the bottom right of the monitor showed me each excruciating minute, which is how I knew exactly what time another guest started making his way down to the lobby. At 6:28 a.m., I noticed movement on the camera that was pointing at the 3rd floor elevator. A young man, dressed in workout clothes, carrying a gym towel. My heart sank, and I began to think of ways to warn him or somehow prevent this thing from doing whatever it was trying to do. I could have pulled the fire alarm. I could have grabbed a chair or something to use as a weapon and jumped out at it. Hell, I could have at least stopped watching. I didn't do any of those things. I watched as the man entered the elevator at the 3rd floor and descended down to the lobby. The second those elevator doors opened, the creature that had been standing in front of my office door for the past 3 hours and 18 minutes made its move. With a speed I could barely keep up with over several camera displays. Its mangled body ran on perfectly functioning legs towards the guest, slamming into walls and leaving a bloody imprint on them as it went. The guest made it 1 foot off of the elevator before this thing tackled him back into it. I only saw a spray of blood hit the opposite wall as the elevator door slowly closed again. This was my chance to get out of the hotel and never look back, but again I found myself rooted to the ground in fear. I couldn't bring myself to tear my eyes away from the monitor, so I watched as the elevator door slowly opened once again. The guest walked out just the same as he had walked in. He had the same chipper smile on his face, and I watched as he walked past the front desk, past the lobby, and the pool, and the laundry room, all the way to the gym. I was out the door and on my way to never coming back again before I could see him enter. I'm riding this in my car a few miles away from the hotel because I couldn't stand to go home yet, but I figured I should make my version of events public just in case. I know that man is running on the treadmill right now, and my coworkers or whoever else comes into the hotel next is going to have to deal with what I went through all over again, but I can't bring myself to care. I even feel too claustrophobic to stay inside my car at this point after spending so long in the back office. My legs are still shaking, and the only thing I want to do right now is run as fast and as far away as I can.
Story 2.
You sure this is the right place, Hank? I shouted from outside the limousine. The husky chauffeur didn't respond, attention transfixed on his handheld television, fiddling with the antennae to minimize static. A cold October wind howled through the valley, causing the slit of my black dress to flutter against my thigh. Frustration mounted behind my eyes as I waited for an answer, glaring through the passenger's side window while shivering from the violent squall, getting the sense that he was intentionally ignoring me. I pulled trembling fists from the pockets of my wool coat and improvised a drum solo against the thick glass. My knuckles were so cold that I barely felt them make contact. The amateur rendition of Van Halen's Hot for Teacher was enough to get his attention. A scowl curled up the side of his face. Without moving his eyes away from the blinking screen, Hank leaned over to roll down the window, his beer gut flopping awkwardly over the central console like a pillowcase half filled with maple syrup. He gave the crank 2 lazy twists, and the window creaked down a few inches. "Robin, what the fuck is the matter? It's the goddamned World Series," he said, pointing at the small TV and acting like I was unaware of that fact. Hank had nearly careened off the road multiple times on the 30-minute drive over here, seemingly unable to drag his eyes away from the game for more than a handful of seconds at a time. I felt a myriad of insults thump against the back of my teeth, begging to be unleashed, but I swallowed my annoyance. "Can you please just look at the sign?" I pleaded, gesturing to the name listed above a picture of the deceased. 85 wasn't our year, but 87. 87 is for the Cardinals, he muttered, still glued to the feed. "Hank, for the love of God, confirm that I'm walking into the right funeral or I'm getting back into the car." I was told the guy's name was John, not John. The damn sign says John. I snapped. Hank slumped his shoulders with childlike exaggeration and sighed. Reluctantly, he shoved a meaty claw into the breast pocket of his blazer, digging around for the instructions given to him by our escort agency. With a crumpled slip of paper in hand, his pupils finally detached from the game. Hastily, he scanned the name and date. "Looks right to me," he remarked. Before I could ask to see it too, he spat chewing tobacco that had been resting along his gum line into the slip. My eyes widened in disbelief as I watched Hank wrap the paper around the brown-black ichor, only to then toss the malformed lump into his coffee cup. "Christ, Hank, you couldn't have just handed it to me like a human being? Or are you not a human being? Maybe you're actually some human-shaped donkey? Does that sound right?" The insult finally brought his eyes to meet mine. Instead of anger, he shot me a threatening grin. A wolf smile, bearing hungry canines in my direction. Look, doll, how about you tiptoe those fragile porcelain feet up to the home's concierge and ask about the service? I'll wait here. If it ain't right, we'll go back to the office. He expected a sheepish reply, but I sure as shit didn't give him one, instead providing a thumbs up with my right hand and a middle finger with my left. I didn't scare easy. Not only that, but I've been in the escort business long enough to know the difference between an actual predator and a small man making empty threats. When I turned to walk up the cobblestone path that led to the funeral home, my ears became filled with the sound of Hank slamming his foot down on the accelerator, tires screeching against asphalt. Didn't even bother to turn back around, honestly. No point. Asshole, I murmured, securing my purse under my arm to prevent it from blowing away as I approached the opulent, repurposed plantation house. The mansion's white pillars loomed over me as I carefully climbed the porch steps, stilettos clacking against the refurbished wood. As I stepped toward the front door, a surge of anxiety unexpectedly sprinted up the length of my spine and planted itself at the top of my neck, crackling around the base of my skull like electricity from exposed wire. With my heartbeat galloping in my chest, I took a deep breath and twisted the knob, not willing to let nervous energy prevent me from earning my keep. A lot of what happened to me was out of my control, but I did one thing wrong that day. My gut was screaming for me to turn around. It implored me to sprint back down those stairs and into the street like the devil himself was close behind me, nipping at my heels. But I ignored the feeling, contorted my face into an expression of grief, and pushed on, unknowingly putting myself into the cult of the scarab's crosshairs, intruding on their right of sacred renewal. "Right this way, ma'am," said the funeral director, leading me into a familiar narrow hallway behind the lobby. Only a week earlier I'd been at this funeral home, pretending to grieve over someone else. As we walked, I reviewed the details I'd received concerning the deceased, provided to my agency by his company's board of investors. Pharmaceutical CFO, passed in his late 60s, very private, had 2 previous marriages. Right hand was mangled during his tenure in Vietnam, doesn't bother with a prosthetic. Months before his death, rumors of him being gay cropped up in the tabloids. I'm playing his secret lover, an unknown buxom paramour, weeping over the loss of their sugar daddy, dispelling the whispers of his potential homosexuality. People purchase my time for an assortment of different reasons. Sometimes I was hired by the soon-to-be deceased, arriving at their memorial service just to boost the overall number of attendees visibly present and grieving. Other times, the request was more specific, and it wasn't the deceased who was hiring me. This was one of those other times. It wasn't glamorous work, lying at some poor sap's funeral on the behalf of someone else and their interests, but was much preferable to the labor I performed when I was first hired. Think fishnet stockings and disagreements over the virtues of condom use. All that said, it'd be disingenuous to say I wasn't proud of myself. This was my niche, and despite the seediness, it was mine, and I was good at it. Considered an expert. Actually, anyone can show up and be a pretty face in the crowd. A 20-something with running mascara and a nice, as cartoonishly boo-hooing into an open casket. But me? I played the assigned role with tact and nuance. I sold a narrative, and 9 times out of 10, my marks bought it. The key was you needed to be a proficient improviser. Discretion was the name of the game in my line of work. I rarely got a lot of background information about the deceased to work with. Meant I had to be capable of thinking on my toes, bobbing and weaving through conversations like my life depended on it. Ironically, though, if I wasn't so damn convincing, I might not have ended up almost suffocating to death less than an hour after the funeral concluded. I expected all the usual sounds of organized memorial would become audible as we approached the reception hall. Sobbing, a pipe organ singing its quiet lamentations, hushed arguments over the division of an inheritance. Sounds most people associated with deep sorrow. To me, however, mourning sounded like work. It was ambient noise I had become so accustomed to that I barely even noticed it. But that's not what I heard as we drew closer to the service. Quite the opposite. Actually, Joyful sounds reverberated down the hallway. As the funeral director opened the door to the reception hall, I heard laughing and the clinking of glasses. The sparkling timbre of a wedding filled my ears, not the joyless dirge of a wake. I stepped in, and for a moment, I truly believed I was walking in on some kind of themed birthday party. Every attendee sported a pure white outfit, head to toe. The previously jubilant noise fizzled out into dead silence when they saw me enter, adorned in funerary black. I was nearly about to excuse myself back through the door when I spied a young man at the opposite end of the vast room, dressed in a black three-piece suit, leaning wearily against an enormous marble coffin. Is this Jom's funeral? I managed to sputter out into the motionless crowd. The 50 or so funeral goers remained silent. I could tell that something about my arrival was intensely befuddling, with looks of confusion painted over the attendees' faces. Eventually, the shrill squeaking of poorly lubricated metal wheels broke the silence. The crowd parted to reveal an elderly woman in a wheelchair pushing herself towards me. She peered from side to side as she approached, observing the still petrified mourners staring at me with a look of disapproval. "Oh, would you relax? Go back to what you were doing. I'll figure it out. Kepri, save us. Y'all would be startled shitless by a ladybug if it flew at you too fast," she croaked. Slowly, the figures in white pulled their attention away from me, and the lively chatter resumed, albeit at a much lower volume. With the funeral reanimated, the elderly woman brought her eyes to mine, converting her scowl into a toothy grin. A wispy white dress hung loosely from her skeletal frame, giving her the appearance of a mobility-challenged banshee. The weight of a golden brooch pulled the front of her dress forward at the collarbone, revealing the outlines of her upper ribs through thin, liver-spotted skin. The accessory was about the size of a golf ball, and it depicted a beetle with what looked like a lotus flower etched onto its wings. "And you are, dear?" she asked, settling in front of me by using a levered brake to halt the wheelchair's momentum. Based on the woman's command of the other mourners and her wizened appearance, I made an educated guess as to her identity. "Hi, you must be Jom's mother?" She nodded, her brow furrowing and her grin melting away as her head tilted up and down. The matriarch studied me intensely, her expression now twisted into one of confusion, like those of the mourners when they first saw me. Relief fluttered through my chest. I briefly savored the pleasurable rush that came after the anxiety of a calculated risk. Then I smiled, took a generous inhale, and continued, launching into an ad-libbed speech I had given countless times before. "It is nice finally to meet you. I wish it wasn't under these circumstances, and I wish I knew your first name, but you know how Private Jom can be dash." I paused and forced a chuckle, letting tears well up as I broke eye contact, body language that screamed, "I'm struggling to use past tense now that he's dead. Oh, this sweet misery." A sigh fell from my lips, and then I picked up where I left off. "You know how Private Jom could be. Imtara, your son and I were together for the last year or so. What's your first name, ma'am?" Unexpectedly, I watched her eyes widen with some mix of alarm and disbelief. It's Tequila." Without saying anything more, she abruptly pivoted her head and torso around, scanning the room for someone. Aquila seemingly couldn't locate them in the crowd, so she just started shouting a name. "Horace! Horace! Could someone bring my grandson over?" The figures closest to us leaped into action, clearly fighting to be the person that fulfilled Aquila's request. Within seconds, one of the attendees, a hulking middle-aged man with biceps like tree trunks, returned with the kid in the black suit that had been previously leaning against the coffin, practically dragging the miserable-looking young man by the wrist to his grandmother. "Ah, there you are, Horace," Aquila cooed. The boy barely responded, giving his elder an affirmative grunt. Before he was pulled from the crowd, I was laser-focused on selling my story, constructing answers to questions that hadn't even been asked yet. Seeing the anguish dripping off his features broke my concentration. He looked to be in his early 20s, about 6 feet tall, with a shaved head and a half-crescent nose ring connecting his nostrils. His eyes were saturated with a deep, reflective sadness, his gaze empty and distant, like he was watching a memory rather than actually seeing anything physically in front of him. The corners of his mouth were collapsed into a rigid, immovable frown, the type of vacant expression that's left over only after you've already completely exhausted every other painful emotion. My heart broke for him. Whatever familial weirdness was currently on display, with the perfect white dress code and the inappropriately cheery atmosphere, the kid seemed like he was the only one experiencing genuine grief. His dad was dead, and he looked hurt and alone. That empathy would last about another 10 minutes. Horace, this woman, Tara, is claiming to have been with your father, and she's showing up here dressed like that. Did you know anything about this? This might be game over, I thought to myself. Need to come up with a way to recover. He pointed his empty gaze at me. For a second, his eyes remained cold. But then, like the flash of blinding white light before the explosion of an atomic bomb, his expression instantly brightened and became animated. It wasn't recognition that had reignited Horace. It was something else. It was an idea. I didn't know at the time, but Horace was a pretty damn good improviser as well. Yeah, I know her. Dad mentioned her a few times in passing. Told me that she may or may not show up today. He wasn't sure whether she really loved him or not, but I think he told her to show up if she did really love him. He paused, calculating what to say next. Tara's an outsider. Dad wasn't sure that we'd accept her, especially after what happened with Diane. Akila turned back to me, now stone-faced and deathly serious. Well, Tara, is all that true? You're here because you love my son. I didn't have long to contemplate the strangeness that was unfolding in front of me, so I acted on instinct. Terrible call. Yes, I love John. That's why I'm here. Horace nearly crumbled to the ground, his immovable frown ascending into a grin swollen with ecstasy. Well, all right then. That's very noble of you, to come here of your own volition, espousing your love for my son. Basil, could you escort Tara to the front? Show her where family sits. The eulogy will be starting in a few minutes. Akila replied. The brawny gentleman with the tree trunk biceps walked over, placing one massive arm forward to guide me and the other massive arm on my shoulder, as if to make sure I wasn't going anywhere. Behind me, I heard Horace cackling, doubling over, and practically wheezing for whatever he found to be so goddamned funny. There was a certain comedy to the way Akila had been positioned to deliver the eulogy. I couldn't appreciate the humor of it at the time, with Basil following me like a shadow, his looming presence causing a veritable chorus of alarm bells to ring loudly in my skull. But in retrospect, I remember the juxtaposition of her in front of the casket being genuinely funny. She was just so absurdly small, and the coffin was just so absurdly big. A marble torpedo behind a human earthworm, wrinkled skin flapping up and down as she spewed her ritualistic bullshit into the microphone. John was a wonderful son, a loving father, and a devoted vicar of Kepri. Akila boomed, voice tinged with bursts of static from cheap speaker systems. When John was on death's door, we all felt his pain. In terms of renewal, he was without an ideal conduit. We all still grieve the loss of Diane, consumed by heresy, leaving him without love and Horace without a mother. I turned to Basil, pointing to my bladder and then pointing to the door. It was a lie. Nature wasn't calling. Not in that sense, at least. My subconscious was screaming, begging me to get the fuck out of that room through whatever means possible. Something is so fucking wrong, I thought, waiting for Basil to respond to my pantomiming. He smiled, but it wasn't reassuring. The grin was patronizing, revealing his own bitter amusement rather than his willingness to help, like he was watching his cat trying and failing to jump onto a forbidden table. The man shook his head no a few times and then placed a hand over my scalp, manually twisting my head back in the direction of Akila. Little did we know, however, that in the nick of time, Jom found love. He was scared to divulge his love to us because she is an outsider, just as Diane was. But by being here, she has proven herself worthy of Kepri's embrace, unlike the heretic. She said, gesturing a bony hand in my direction, long acrylic nails taking the shape of hawk talons. Tara, we're very grateful for your love and your commitment to Jom. As you well know, passionate love is the best conduit. It's easier for Kepri to mold. But, of course, the love of youngest son will do if passionate love isn't available. All that is to say, I'm sure Horace is very grateful as well. At that point, my heart was crashing against my ribcage like jackhammer, percussive and relentless. Basil's sturdy hand remained on my head, fixing my gaze on Aquila. Because of that, I couldn't look away when the matriarch turned to face me, detailing what was to be my fate. Your Black Knight, desolate and bare, will draw the death from Jom, granting him renewal. Sweat poured over my body, drenching me with sticky fear. Are you ready, Tara? Another white-clad figure appeared behind Aquila, wrenching the heavy lid of the casket open. Inside, Jom's desiccated corpse laid flat, arms crossed over his shoulders, naked as the day he was born. But his body only covered half of the available space. You see, the reason the coffin was so damn large is because it was built to house two separate people. The other half had been for Jom's son, but now it was designated for me. They were going to bury me alive in that marble tomb. As if I even needed it confirmed at that point, I noted that the body had both of their hands. My actual assignment had lost one of his during their tour of Vietnam. Hank had dropped me off on the wrong day. When I didn't move towards the casket, paralyzed by fear, Aquila spoke into the microphone one more time, sharp static crackling through the speakers again, like an electric tongue whipping invisibly through the air. Basil, it seems like Tara is having a bit of cold feet. Bring her over here, show our conduit how spacious it is inside, next to her beloved. The man's muscular paw pulled my head up, forcing me to my feet. I tried to brainstorm even a fragment of an exit strategy, but for the second time that day, Horace broke my concentration. Somewhere in the back of the room, I heard him snickering under his breath, downright elated with his unbelievably good fortune. I wouldn't let him distract me again after that. Despite my hysteric pleas, the coffin lid kept sliding. The harsh friction of stone moving against stone filled my ears, like the sonorous bellowing of an unseen god, welcoming me into their vast kingdom, excited to show me around. A waning beam of light, a rumbling snap of the lid settling into place, and then there was nothing. I'm plunged into blackness, unfettered, impenetrable, and all-consuming. Incomprehensibly perfect darkness, like the deepest ocean floor or the most distant reaches of space. My mind spins. My heart quakes against my chest. The truth didn't work. I need something else. 15 minutes earlier. This is a huge misunderstanding. I didn't know him. I didn't know Jom. I sputtered, now only feet away from my waiting tomb. No one responded. Not a peep of recognition from any of the attendees. I wondered if the words had actually left my mouth, or if I had just imagined they did as Basil forced me closer to the marble casket, inch by tortuous inch. He was looming over me like a rain cloud, leading me forward with a burly arm wrapped tightly around my shoulders. At that point in my life, I hadn't ever been married, which gave the slow, ritualistic procession towards the corpse in a box a certain perverse, darkly humorous quality. Like this was the closest I'd ever get to being a bride, given my sordid lifestyle. A sick joke, the universe chuckling alongside Horace, having a hearty laugh at my expense. It was almost right, too. It had most of the pieces, at least. From a distance, it could have looked like a wedding if you didn't squint too hard. Basil, an older gentleman, guiding me towards my soon-to-be husband, giving me away till death do us part. Aquila, the officiator, reciting the ceremonial words and ordaining the marriage. A crowd of loved ones, waiting patiently to witness the union. All the cardinal signs of a marriage service, excluding my pulseless betrothed, of course. I looked at him and felt a frantic repulsion cascading through my body. This was no wedding. Jom had been completely drained of fluid, crumpling his skin and causing his body to curl slightly forward like a dead spider. A single, oversized nail pierced his skull, entering one temple and exiting the other, with bits of light reflecting off the shimmering metal visible in his eye sockets. If his eyes were present, they would have been shish kebabbed. They had been excised, however. I'd rather not speculate on whether someone performed that surgery pre- or post-mortem. As I approached the casket, My thoughts and actions had stagnated, mired in the sheer impossibility of my circumstances. A paralytic disbelief of sorts, a desperate prayer to wake up from this fever dream. A smell broke that stagnation. The scent of embalming fluid, ripe yet artificial like a cucumber pickled in bleach. When it hit my nostrils, my body sprang to life. Formaldehyde worked like smelling salts that day. "Let me the fuck go," I shrieked, arcing my arm forward to send a pointed elbow behind me, crashing into Basil's diaphragm. The blow stunned him momentarily, allowing me to squat down and out of the arm that had been tangled around my shoulders. It wasn't enough, though. As I turned to run, he extended his leg in the direction I was escaping, tripping me with the heel of his white boot. I fell hard, face first, my forehead bouncing off the tile floor with enough force to cause my ears to ring. Terror had made me forget the golden rule, the key to survival in the seedy underbrush where I earned my keep. If they're bigger than you, go for the eyes or the balls. I moaned on the floor, concussed and bleeding from a fresh cut over my eyebrow. Before I knew it, Basil had pulled me upright. My vision spun, making the room a disorientating blur of light and movement. In the meantime, the attendees had erupted, jumping from their seats and unleashing cries of anger and disgust, enraged by my treachery. When I could focus, my eyes landed on Aquila, still sitting in a wheelchair next to the coffin. Deep hurt twisted the old woman's face. Wrath burned in her eyes, yet her quivering lips showed her dejection, as if she couldn't decide whether to scream or sob. I bent down, making my face level with hers, tried to explain my outrageous circumstances over the shouting and caterwauling of the white-clad funeral-goers. Unfortunately, the words came out rushed. The coherency was spotty at best. There was too much to explain and not enough time to do it in. "Listen, Aquila, my name is not Tara, it's Robin. I work for an escort agency. My job involves attending funerals, sometimes pretending to be someone I'm not. They assigned me to go to a funeral for a man named John, but my driver must have dropped me off on the wrong day. I'm paid to lie. I didn't know your son." Somewhere in the crowd, I could hear Horace shouting at us. "Whatever she's saying, it's not true. She just doesn't want to be a conduit anymore for Dad. Just like Mom." Aquila turned her head away from me, her reply bubbling with resentment. "You're almost as bad as Diane, Tara. Kepri have mercy on your soul." I beat my knuckles bloody against the marble lid, but it wasn't any use. Although the casket was wide enough to fit 2 people, it was less than a foot high. I couldn't swing my arm back far enough to generate meaningful force. Even if I could have, though, it wouldn't have mattered. Not even Basil's tree trunk biceps could have broken through solid stone. What chance did I have? Still, I had to do something. Eventually, one of my punches went off course, curving a little too far to my left. When it rebounded off the lid, it fell straight down, and the back of my hand clipped the dead man's face before I could retract the limb to its original position on my chest. At that point, I stopped my futile barrage. I had been doing all I could to avoid touching the corpse. Now that I had, all of my energy and focus needed to be diverted to keeping myself from vomiting. My mind replayed the memory of that sensation on a loop. He was drier than I expected, desiccated and stiff like rotten apricot or expired beef jerky. Leathery comes close to describing it. Reptilian comes even closer. Honestly, though, I can't find something that fits just right. There just aren't the words for it. An unexpected thunk erupted under the tips of my shoulder blades, and I finally screamed. I had been trying to stay calm, conserve every precious molecule of oxygen that I could. But the surprise broke my concentration, and I let loose gallons of pent-up terror into a single, ear-splitting noise. I coughed and wheezed from the strain it put on my vocal cords, but as soon as I could, I revved up my larynx and started all over again. Eventually, I ran out of steam, shrieks puttering out into choked wails and smaller fits of coughing. That exhaustion, thankfully, was helpful. The numbness was centering, in a sense. It allowed the more analytic parts of my brain a chance to take the wheel. I needed a plan, so I listened closely, trying to use ambient noise to determine where I was. With my ears perked, I could appreciate a gentle tapping from somewhere above me. It sounded like the dainty pitter-pattering of drizzling rain, but it wasn't consistent. There were pauses in between the tapping every few seconds or so. The realization caused a surge of panic to explode through my chest like dynamite, but I maintained my composure. With time running thin, I couldn't afford not to maintain my composure. The thunk was the casket colliding with the bottom of a grave, and the tapping sound was dirt being shoveled onto me. Onto us. Just then, there was another sound. Something much closer, internal to the coffin, rather than the external tapping of the dirt against stone. A quick pop from somewhere beside me. The creaking of a joint that hadn't moved in quite a while. Oh Christ. Oh my God, he's biting me. He's scratching in my face. Jesus Christ, let me the fuck out of here. The tapping stopped. There was muffled conversation from somewhere outside the coffin, but I was too insulated to hear what was said. I kept screaming, Yom, I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. He doesn't want me here. He doesn't want me here. About a minute later, a tiny glimmer of light entered the casket, mirroring my evolving fate. Life snatched away from death at the 11th hour. Not much time spare. The lid fell to the ground with a heavy thump. Two blurry figures stood above me, but I couldn't discern exactly who they were. The sunlight was blinding. I must have looked like death. Long, four-fingered scratches all over my face and chest, horizontal swipes overlapping with vertical ones to form bloody crosslinks. Wild terror stitched into my eyes. Ragged breaths like I was in the throes of an asthma attack. A familiar voice from outside the grave rang down to me. You said, he doesn't want me here. That's what you said, shouted Aquila. I slowed my hyperventilation. My vision finally adjusted, and I saw two male attendees I didn't recognize, eyes darting between me and Jom's corpse, inspecting us. By the time they had opened the coffin, Jom had stilled. Yes, he started whispering that to me. Then he attacked me. There was a pregnant pause. The men looked up, waiting for their next orders. All right then, he must be rejecting you. Guess he knows better than we do. If you weren't his love, you wouldn't be able to grant him renewal, I suppose. Pull her up here. Someone get my grandson from the van, too. Once I was topside, Basil became my watchdog again. There was discussion about what to do with me, but I didn't wait for them to come to an agreement. As fortune would have it, my captor was fairly well endowed, both his stem and his berries. Makes it all easier to find in a pinch. I spun, grasped his family jewels, twisted them around their axis, and pulled down, bringing Basil to his knees. Once his head was within reach, I jabbed a thumb into his eye. Don't think I blinded him, but he was certainly incapacitated at that point. Before long, I was sprinting out of the graveyard. I passed Horace on my way out, writhing against the ground, two attendees dragging him by his wrists towards the hole his father was lying in. He saw me, and I'm glad I had the presence of mind to wave at him as I was dashing by, a massive smile plastered on my face. Of course, Jom didn't actually rise from the dead. That popping sound was a shoulder joint, but it made a noise because I accidentally knocked into it, not because he was moving it. But that gave me an idea. What I realized was that in order for those psychos to believe that I wasn't who I had said I was originally, I needed objective evidence that I was an imposter. From what I could gather, they were trying to use me to resurrect Jom. But like any cult, the process had rules. Passionate love is the best conduit. The youngest son will do if passionate love is not available. Your Black Knight, desolate and bare, will draw the death from Jom, granting him renewal. I pretended it was real and imagined what might happen. Maybe Jom would attack me, desperate not to be buried with a con artist that wouldn't actually provide him with new life because their sacrifice didn't abide by the rules. So I scratched myself to hell and back, spewed some bullshit about how he wasn't actually dead, made sure to sell the idea while not making my actual intentions obvious. It worked, and I'm beyond grateful that it did. That said, there's no justice to any of it. Horace didn't deserve to be in that pit either. But at the end of the day, I'm a survivalist. Better him than me. I can't believe all of that was 30 years ago. Time really is a wonder and a terror. Never went back to the agency after that near miss. Partially because of how big they fucked up, stranding me there on the wrong day. Mostly, though, I left because I didn't want Aquila and Basil to show up at some point, looking to snuff out a loose thread. I mean, I told Aquila my first name and my occupation. I felt like it wouldn't require too much legwork to find me if they really wanted to. Packed my bags, moved across the country. Kept my first name, but changed my surname. Got myself a husband and a few kids, as well as a job as a hairdresser. You know, I finally integrated into society. Left my niche behind, so to speak. Over the years, the memories have grown a bit dusty. They don't have as much terror associated with them as they used to, which in turn has caused me to be plagued by nostalgia. A longing for the good old days when I was really and truly alive. Of course, that's all delusional rubbish. I just needed a reminder, a sample of that long dormant fear. I sure as shit got one. About a week ago, I was in the middle of an appointment, going through the motions like I had so many times before. I finished up, about to walk away, when the client said something. A complete non sequitur. Barely said a word before that. You know, it's the color that's really the key. I shot the client a funny look because I had no idea what they were talking about. They had asked for a trim, not a dye job. They saw my confusion in the mirror, gave me a lecherous smile, and continued. Color is so important, love. It doesn't get as much credit or attention as it used to, but that doesn't mean it's lost its potency. Quite the opposite, actually. It's a resource that's remained relatively untapped, which means the potency has accumulated, gathering over time. Now, my love, it's a wellspring. What I'm saying is, it all would have worked just fine if you stayed with me. You really were dressed for the occasion, Robin. And finally, I see it. He looks like Horace, but not exactly. I hadn't ever seen him with eyes before, but I suppose that man was Jom. Call me sometime, okay? We have a few things to clear up. He handed me a card on his way out. I'm staring at it now, fighting back nausea, feeling my heart slam against my ribs, rapid like the wings of a hummingbird. There's a number on the back. MC, Museum Curator for the Khepri Foundation. XXXXXXXX. Pure white on both sides. Golden scarab on the back, with a lotus flower etched into its wings. They finally found me. That's it for today's creepy Reddit tales. Before we go, I just want to say a quick thanks to all of you for watching, liking, and sticking around. You guys keep this channel going, and I'll be back soon with more stories that'll make your skin crawl. Drop a comment if you've got your own spooky tale to share, and I'll see you in the next one.